Hello, Kunos. Welcome back to the Guna Pavilion. I um I had something that was sticking in my mind, and I really thought that I should talk about this because I know that lots of people are talking about this as well. And this is probably going to be a narrative that's going to continue for a lot of for Arsenal play. A lot has been said, about this. And when I did my Pavilion and debrief of the Man City versus Arsenal game, I touched on this a little bit, but I just couldn't help the fact that a lot of the criticism towards Arteta has been grossly unfair. I watched that game again. In fact, I went back to watch the Liverpool game. I watched that Liverpool game again. I watched the Man City game because there's so much that you can gather when you watch the game again. When in the moment you don't have the nerves of, because you know what the result is, win, lose, or draw, right? Nothing is going to change that. So it gives a certain calmness when you watch the game. And I do encourage a lot of Arsenal fans, to watch the games, especially, those games that you initially you thought, you know, maybe it was too negative. Maybe we didn't create enough in those games. Go and watch those games again and pay attention to what the players were doing on that pitch and then see whether that changes your opinion on the game. If your opinion stays the same, fair enough. Um, but I think it always benefits from watching a game over again because you might just see some things that you didn't notice when you watch the game. And I certainly did. I certainly saw lots of things. And there is a debate now that I hope people can start to have. What is more important? Is it the players on the pitch or the style or the formation on the pitch? And what I mean by that is, can you have attacking players on the lineup but still be defensive? And can you have defensive players on the lineup and still be offensive? And I think it's important because football is not very black and white, right? It's not always the fact that, the players on the pitch always represent exactly the same thing as you think. Because we've seen in games, where even Martinelli is in a game and then he ends up, in the forward position, right? I don't think anyone would have expected Martinelli to be the one running into goal, almost from a central position, coming in to score that equalizer against Man City. And Man and Lily have done this a lot of times, running into goal, being almost that furthest player, for Arsenal. So I went and did a little bit of digging. I thought, let me see whether, this managers that everyone always talks about, and I haven't done with Slot because there's not a lot of, evidence with Slot, and maybe there's a smaller sample size. But I thought, I'll go and look at Pep. I'll go look at to Klopp and just see whether, they had some of this pragmatism when they play the big teams. And for some of you, when you look at this, it will really be shocking, especially considering how everyone lauded those managers in terms of what they did. And listen, right, there are lots of people that this is not going to change their minds in terms of that game because, they've made up their minds about it. And hey, listen, I wasn't always an Arteta fan, right? And their receipts, I've been on, other platforms, where I was just thinking he's just not cut for it, and I wanted him gone, in the first 2 years. But I think actually I've turned around a little bit and I've been open-minded, to see things to convince me. And I had this famous sort of checklist, that I wanted Arteta to check, in my mind in terms of me being, seeing him as progressing Arsenal in the right direction. And maybe you should, as fans, have your checklist and see whether Arteta checks it. Still, don't be driven by the narrative because the narrative is really, really big, on Arsenal. So, was Arsenal too cautious versus Liverpool and City? Is this really unusual or just magnified because it's Arsenal? So let's look at some historical receipts, right? So I'm looking at a game, February 20 and 25 versus Arsenal, Pep, right? So De Bruyne and Gundogan were benched in that game, big games, right? It was seen as pragmatism over flair, right? Which is kind of interesting because I think most people wouldn't recognize an Arsenal team or a Pep team, to have players that, are basically not there. Let's look at another game. So this was Liverpool versus Chelsea, April 2023. Into this game, Klopp benched Salah, Trent, Robertson, all bench. Everyone was shocked. But Klopp framed it as rotation and tactical balance. We're not talking about small games here. We're talking about, big games. Listen, and then there is another example in the Champions League, and I know that's not in the Premier League, but Manchester City second leg against Real Madrid. And Haaland was benched, and Pep came back, and said, Haaland tried to go, and whatever reason, he couldn't play in the game. My point is that, coaches every now and then, select a team, not necessarily because they want to have the most offensive players, but they believe that it's a team that generally can win that game. And you gotta stand by that. And if the criticism comes, the criticism comes. And that's why I have no problem with, Arteta defending himself. And of course, people have taken that defense and ran with it, in terms of what they believe Arteta is doing. But I don't think he can win, either way. I just think that, at this point, the narrative is there and lots of people want to pursue the narrative. It's not necessarily fair, but it's about perception. Pep and Klopp have built reputations, and maybe that's one thing that Arteta doesn't have. I do concede that he hasn't won a title, he hasn't won lots of trophies, so he's not given the benefit of the doubt. And until he does that, it's almost like he doesn't have the right, to be pragmatic. People forget that, they say styles make fight. And that Liverpool game, Liverpool didn't offer anything in that game. When I watched that game again, and I do encourage everyone else to go back and watch the game, the first 3 minutes, Liverpool didn't cross the halfway line. They conceded possession to Arsenal. I think in the first 10 minutes there were two counter attacks in that game. There was a mazy run by Jurgen Timber, and if the pass was just a little bit more accurate, Gyökeres could have been in on goal. Liverpool had a counter attack. But was stopped before he even got into the box. In the first 10 minutes, Liverpool did not get into Arsenal's box. And then you can kind of look at the tail of the game. For me, it was both teams cancelling themselves out, and it took a worldy free kick to win that game. Listen, criticisms will come because, when you have players on the bench, people question your selection. And that's fair. I think it's over the top, for people to immediately conclude that this is how Arsenal season is going to go. Um, Arsenal have had the third most toughest start, to the season. And yes, Liverpool have had a Merseyside derby. They've also played Arsenal as well, and you could add Newcastle to the mix. And so, yes, they've come out of those games winning all five games. So I think we'll see. Um, I think last season, I do remember Liverpool losing to Nottingham Forest and drawing, against Chelsea, drawing against Arsenal, and everyone was, commending them, for that start, as well. So, hey, I think this will continue, and it's down to Arteta to, create that new moment for Arsenal so that this becomes a label that no longer thrown on Arsenal. And hey, they're gonna move on to something else. And if Arsenal fans haven't caught on, they really should, because the media is always gonna find something. Criticize Arsenal when we lost, when we won at Old Trafford. Criticize Arsenal when we lost at Anfield. Criticize Arsenal when we drew at Manchester City. So, guys, listen, this was just a quick one. I just wanted to just plant some seeds, for a little bit of balance. It's not about defending Arteta, but it's also about just seeing the game for the context. Now, we play Newcastle on Sunday, and by the time we play that game, if Liverpool win against Crystal Palace, which is more likely to happen, then Arsenal will be 8 points behind um, Liverpool. So, of course, this game against Newcastle is so important. But I think that we can go into this game without any fear. And I'll touch on it in my preview, for the Newcastle game. But guys, let me know what you think. Do you agree that the criticism is over the top? Do you think the selection is too cautious? Do you think it's pragmatic? Do you think that, sometimes the game detects, what happens? We go into that game 0-0, come out in the second half, score a goal. I think everyone quickly forgets who started. in that game, but because we didn't win, that would be a reference point. So fill it up in the comment section, guys. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you really enjoy the content. I'll see you in the next one.